Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video podcast from the Untitled X group. I have with me here today David Hobbs, who's going to take us through some new ideas and some new technology, which I'm actually pretty excited about. As you know, we are pretty software agnostic here at Omnichannel X. However, if there is something new and exciting on the market, which is not really commoditized and people might want to know about it, then we're happy to talk about something because it's addressing a pain point which we think a lot of our participants and our community talks about. So I've invited David to tell me a little bit about what he's been working on, and we're going to have a chat. So this is going to be kind of webinar-ish, but what the feel we're going for is if we all got to pull over to the side of the conference with David's laptop, and he got to have a personal chat with us. That's how I'm going to run this. So both of us will be talking. I'll be asking questions, and David will be taking us through some ideas and some technology. So David, do you want to introduce yourself? I am Nazar Bina, Program Director for Omnichannel X. Hopefully you know me by this point, but please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background.
Hi, Naz. Thanks a lot for having me on. I've had my own consulting practice for 10 years now, and I help organizations in early digital strategy before making really big transformations like redesigns, et cetera. So some of that is executive decision-making, workshops, and things like that, but a lot of it is around content. And really, the reason that I even developed a tool in the first place is because that I was hacking stuff together with different tools, kind of jerry-rigging things. And really, there was no way to do the kind of analysis I wanted to do, so I built a tool to do it. So Naz, maybe I go through a little bit just of background, and then I dive into the tool itself. Does that sound good?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're trying to solve and how this came to be.
Yeah, so really, I think that this is a reaction to how, in general, as an industry, I think we're approaching large content or small content, but content in general, the analysis as an analysis of a list of content. And frequently, it's manually going through that list. And I think that that's a very ineffective way of doing things. So really, what I think we should be doing is discovering our content and making decisions about our content. So in the discovery, the point is that we don't even necessarily know what the questions are until we start diving into an analysis. And with decisions, we really need to decide what we're going to do with the content, not just stare at it for its own sake.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me as a practitioner. Either in-house or out-of-house content strategists or content people are presented with this mass of content, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes millions of pages to look at. And where do you start? We don't know, what has been going on for the past months, so much as years or decades. So I think the automation for discovery something makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, great. And I think that it's worth touching upon what I think is the kind of standard way of doing this, which is using a tool like Screaming Frog, and I think it usually, it often is Screaming Frog, which is a crawler, and it's a crawler really built for SEO analysis, not really for content analysis in general, and Excel, right? Those are kind of the default two tools that are being used now. But there are a lot of problems with it. One is that from a decision-making work perspective, it's pretty weak and inconsistent. So, I often see organizations before I, get involved that have taken a big list of all the content and then send it off to the different departments to make decisions about. Well, that's just a really crummy way to do this. It's inconsistent. It might be that just one group is, looks at things one way or is more motivated than another. But as a business overall, you're not making very good decisions. You're not seeing the overall patterns of the site by looking at these lists. It also, I often see these very rigid approaches to things. It's like, well, because this tool gives me that, this output, that's what I'm going to do my analysis on. And that really rubs me the wrong way too, because, we need to be doing the kind of analysis that is based on the actual problems of a particular site, right?
Right. Well, it also seems to encourage silos in the sense
Yeah,
that everything under this major menu heading goes to these people. Everything under this major menu heading goes to those people. So holistic, really customer-centric analyses is not supported by that process at all.
yeah, great point, Naz. And that and one of the things that this tool is built for is really complex digital presences that have lots of sites. I'll show you some of that kind of hierarchy too, where
Oh, so it works multi-site as well.
yeah, so I'll show that where you can have if you're an agency or a consultant, you can have lots of clients, and each client can have groups of sites, and then each group of site has many sites. So you can do analysis at the whole organization level, or the site or the group level. So for example, with one client of mine, I was helping them first with their major brand. So that was all on its own kind of group because it was the biggest chunk, at least at the beginning. Then they had their minor brands. So there was one site group that had the minor brands under it. And then another site group that was international, and then it had the tens of international sites underneath it. And we could look at any of those levels, right? We could say like, well, let's just look at international for now, et cetera.
Cool.
So anyway, I'll show more about that, but it's very much—
cut and recut on the fly, which is,
yes,
if you're working with spreadsheets, theoretically possibly for spreadsheet is very good, but not quite so easy if you've done the analysis in a certain way.
Yeah, and Excel and using a spreadsheet too. Just for a client now, I was writing up why move away from spreadsheets for some of their analysis. And I think that one of the problems with Excel is it kind of encourages you to kind of mix your analysis with the data itself and stuff like that. So that gets complicated. And so anyway, this tool kind of makes it out of the gate so that it's ready to deal with those kind of like multi-tier analyses and stuff. I would emphasize though that I think sometimes when I'm talking about that to folks that they get a little overwhelmed. I mean, this kind of analysis I think is important to do even at the small scale where it's not like lots of sites, but nonetheless it's specifically built with that in mind, because that's really the genesis of this tool is dealing with projects like that.
Cool. I can't wait to see it.
Cool. And then also, another big thing is like revamping decisions. Like, let's say you decide if you had farmed off to lots of people to make a decision, and then one day you say, you know what, we're not going to consider articles old unless they're at least 2 years old. And before we were saying it was at least 1 year old. That's a big deal if you've handed it off manually, right? Now you have to go through and tell me about. So what we want is strong and efficient decisions about our content. We want an exploratory approach to analysis, and we want the big picture and detailed view. And Screaming Frog in Excel or some other crawler and some other spreadsheet, they only give you the detailed view. You can hack at it. I mean, I've hacked at it. We've all hacked at it. But
you can program Excel basically, but
yeah, exactly.
Do you want to?
Yeah, exactly. Or another common thing that we've all done in Excel is you filter by something, you see how many it is, then you look at what that number is, and you do pivot tables and all these things. But the thing is that it's all these kind of ad hoc things you're building up rather than really being coherent about it.
And then you hand your spreadsheet template to somebody else, and then they have no clue how to maintain it.
Yeah, right. So in the end, what we want is, especially if we're at the point where we're about to make like a major change, so a redesign or whatever, we want, in my opinion, big picture, we want to do three things. One is, what are the buckets of content? So like overall, like what kind of content do we have? Then the disposition, what are we going to do with it? And then who's going to do it? And so what this tool does, and I'll show it to you. And again, I'm just trying to give the kind of context, because one thing I've found in the tool is that it kind of, since it's such a different way of like looking at things, like diving straight in can be kind of confusing.
Oh yes, but you're building up the anticipation.
Okay, great.
Just to be clear, I've never seen this before. This isn't staged. We're going to see my reactions live. This is a unboxing video.
Yeah, right. In order to do this, you really want to do things by rules, and I'll show more about that. But it's things like, if the folder, so, let's say it's ibm.com/blog/fancyblog. That first blog is kind of like the first folder. So you can say things like, if the folder is blog, then it is a blog, and we're going to move as is automatically, and the integrator is going to do it. And I'll show you more about that.
Okay.
And also it's got deduplication built in. So this at the URL level. So this is something that's a big problem with any kind of crawler, is that you end up with this big list of URLs that almost certainly has duplicates in it. So it automatically does deduplicating if you're merging in from other sources. It handles that. But the exploratory approach, this is something that I think is key too, and that is that we, like I mentioned before, we don't necessarily even know what the questions are before we really are diving into the content. I mean, big picture, the question might be, what are we going to do with this content? Something like that. But when you go down another layer down, it might be things like, wow, we're realizing that, we've got a lot of blog sites, and the type of blog site is actually relevant to the decision we make. And then it's like, okay, well, let's consider that. So there's a lot of charting in here. So again, I think that helps find, patterns. And also it's got a copy. Once you bring in a site, it has a full copy of the site, so that you can keep doing subsequent analysis without going back and hitting your client or your own organization's site. Also, you can scrape information off pages. You can pull in information from any arbitrary source. So it's building, a very flexible way of doing things. And I'll show you more about this big picture and detailed view. But the idea is that we don't want to just show the big picture. We don't want it to be totally divorced from, okay, what content are we actually talking about?
You want to be able to zoom in and out.
Yeah, so zoom in and out. So,
or drill down, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Okay, so anticipation is definitely peaking. David, we got to see this thing.
Great. So I'll start just by showing the main parts of the main navigation, basically, of Content Chimera, because I think it kind of gives a flavor of what's going on. One is clients. So again, if you are working on a site that doesn't...
Are you doing a screen share that we're not seeing? Or are you still...
Oh, I guess I am. All right, so let me share. All right.
There we go.
Great. So as I mentioned, if you are working on a single site, then you don't necessarily have to think too much about clients, just kind of forget about it. But for those of you that are, there's the concept of clients. So that's the first navigation item. The most interesting one is assets and metadata. And so here, once we have imported a site, either by crawling or you can consume from Screaming Frog or consume from other sources, whatever. Once you've brought in the data, it is automatically trying to graph it to show you patterns. So you see a graph under assets and metadata. And again, the idea is that we're seeing the assets, right? We're looking at the overall picture of the assets. And we have a lot of ways of bringing in more assets and metadata. So I'll come back to this.
Give us a little bit of definition. So you've got this idea of assets and metadata. What is the definition of asset, and how is it grouping up things? When it says you've got 1,000 of X, what is the bucket? Where is that coming from? Is that automatic, or is that something that we set up?
Yeah, so the current view we're looking at is completely automatic, but what it's representing is fundamentally unique URLs that are like major documents. So like HTML, PDF, and things like that. It's not looking at images, etc., unless the image was a link and not embedded on a page. Anyway, there's some technicalities in exactly how it works, but fundamentally it's major, it's unique URLs for pages is the best way to look at it, but it can also be PDFs and things like that.
Okay.
And the what we're looking at here is the folder, like I mentioned here. Let's bring up an example. So I'll now just show you the sampling. So there are 1,753 of these. It samples 10, and we'll just look at one.
So it treats everything after a slash like a folder.
Yes, exactly. So
So you got
here,
website slash something, and that something will be treated as a folder, and anything after another slash is treated as a subfolder.
exactly. Right. So like here, edfinitiative.org/publications, right? It's slash publications.
Mm-hmm.
That's folder 1. That's the reason it appeared as folder 1 equals publications. And that's the reason it's part of this count of 1,753.
Okay, cool.
And so one of the key parts of this tool is that it automatically extracted the folders. So it's not like you have to have some hacky, Google Sheet formula that you have to copy down and all this kind of stuff, right? It's just automatic. And even if you do already have a crawl and screaming frog that you want to use, for example, and you bring it into Content Camera will automatically figure out things like folders. So even if you don't crawl with Content Camera, it'll do it. So this is one of the basic graphs, and this is the kind of global default graph. And I'll come back and show more. But that's assets, and then metadata is the information we have about these URLs. So if I just expanded to look at kind of the advanced view here, and now we can see that folder 1 is an example, but there's lots of things that we can use here
as metadata.
As metadata, yeah. So that's assets and metadata.
So these are very cool stuff. I'm seeing color, size.
Yeah. So one of the actually
are those controlling the chart, or are those types of metadata?
It's controlling the chart, and for many of these, you're graphing something about the metadata. So for example, if we switch over to the ROT view here.
What does ROT stand for?
Redundant, outdated, or trivial content.
Oh,
cool. This handles the R and the T of it. So the redundant and trivial part. So you asked about color.
Yeah.
So this is we didn't have to see the advanced view to do this. So they're these kind of default ones. But just to explain those options, you'll see color, and it's colored by what the ROT analysis said it is. So see in this pull down, we selected ROT. We could select something else. Group, we could also group by. This is often useful for very large sites when we want to kind of group things in different ways. Okay. So you can group, and then you have bars within the groups, and then colors.
Cool. This is the drill down, zoom in, zoom out thing we were talking about.
Yeah, and so like here we can look and see like, okay, what is the redundant news? And up comes an example of 10. You hit it again, you get another example.
Okay. So it's saying redundant is that the same content is appearing in 2 different places?
Almost the same. So this is where it becomes a more complicated.
Oh wow! So it can do a non-exact match, like a fuzzy match.
Yeah. So yeah, why don't we look at this, Tom? Because this is interesting and a feature I just added. I'm really excited about this because this is a hard problem. Obviously, exact matches are easy, but this is near matches. So let's look at the redundant ones. So if we look at let's see, what are some, let's look in public. So we're going to look at publications that are redundant.
Okay.
So we open this up. And so here we have, let's find one that's more interesting. Okay, the second one here. So household fuel choice in urban Ethiopia. So we'll look at that. And then let's open up the one that it said is a duplicate. So now we'll open up this. Now this is probabilistic. We could come up with the 0.1% of the time where it does not find a match. But let's see. So we have modeling household cooking. So there's a piece of content. And now let's look at this other one. I don't know why it's taking so long. Now notice that even the word is different here, right? So this one's household fuel choice to urban Ethiopia. So I don't know why the site is so slow.
This is just is this your site that you set up? Is it a test site? Is it just
no, it's a real site. It's a real site that I crawled just to test it out. Here, let me refresh this page. I don't know why this is happening. Always during the demo. All right, there we go.
You're relying on third parties.
So if we look here, see, we use 3 rounds of rich panel data. There's a good chance see, it doesn't say this paper uses. It says, see, this paper uses 3 rounds, right? Here it says we use 3 rounds. And then regression results from random effects regression results from random effects. See, so one of the interesting things about duplicate content is one, even if we think it could be done, even if someone could check manually one-to-one, it's impossible at scale.
Yeah.
And then also, like, we look at this example, and
you've got
it took you and I, say what?
And it's many to many. Like, you'd have to like check every page against every other page.
Yeah. And so here, even like you and I, like looking at this, well, at least for me, it took me a sec to even appreciate that this is a duplicate. I had to like, it wasn't immediately obvious to me. Like the title is different, et cetera. So anyway, it does, that's an example of the kind of analysis it does. So
can you throttle that? So if you have a lot of, let's say, formulaic reports where it's always going to, for example, it will be the same because a lot of the text is templated, but there's only certain things that change, like it's 2 studies versus 3 studies, and then it was household versus urban, household versus commercial, and so on and so on. Can you throttle it so it's less sensitive to redundancy?
So there's a lot to duplication. And actually I have a webinar coming up November 5th if people want to dive in detail on this. But to answer your specific question, you'll notice that there's actually a lot more to this page. So here, so the title was different, the authors here, right? And then here we'll look, oh no, the authors were the same. But like the related publications, are they the same? See the right nav is different. So if we look at the page writ large, right, they are very similar. So we could pick any site, any 2 pages, right? But the analysis didn't look at the whole page.
Yeah.
It just looked at the content itself here.
The body content.
Yeah.
Well, and the title, I guess.
No, it actually doesn't look at the title. Now, that's something useful to think about as whether it makes sense to do that or not. So far, I felt like it actually is more distracting to do that than to just look at the content. Anyway, that's something to potentially explore and to refine. But right now, it just looks at the content. And you'll notice that here, when we did a sample, so let's pull up a sample again, you'll see what confidence it's saying it found the duplicate at.
Right. So the redundancy, it can say that it's very confident, not very confident, etc. With that this is redundant content.
Yeah, and that's based on whether it's how much of the page it's kind of able to strip out. So the most sensitive part of finding duplicates is actually what you were just pointing out, that it's looking at the template itself and making sure you can extract out what you need. So if you have a modern site that uses the article tag in a expected way, then by default, it'll just figure it out. So like when you go against David Hobbs Consulting, for example, it's a modern site, it uses standards. You don't even have to configure anything. It'll just find this stuff. But like for this one, I had to go in and look at the HTML and say, okay, this is the class that shows where the template is. So it doesn't automatically figure out where the template is. But it also, you'll notice here that it's finding the canonical copies too, and the trivial content. So there's a lot of
content. What does trivial mean?
So if we look at one of these, so let's look at this guy here. You'll see that there's almost nothing here. I forget what threshold I put it at, but it's something like, if it's got under, 50 words or something, it's like, it's marking it as trivial.
Okay, right. So there's a question of whether it should be its own page or not.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's a discussion, right? So again, this tool isn't taking it as like, oh, it's trivial, delete it, right? It's like, okay, this is, in an analysis, this appears to be trivial. You take it from here, what you want to do with it, which leads us to rules. So maybe we should go over to rules. So again,
I pointed this thing on my website. It's taken every slash, made that into something that I can group things by, and within that it's indexed it all, said how much of it is kind of overlapping with itself. Is that within the category or across the whole site, or is that something I can configure?
All of the metadata that it captures is kind of stands on its own and can be combined however you want.
Okay.
So for example, we could say like what, well, just to pick folder 2 as an example, we could say folder 2 versus, right. And it's probably not very interesting, but that's what we could do. Also, just to show you real quick, another example, because this might also illustrate some more what, the different ways that you can slice information. Let's go to a university site and pick all, I mentioned site groups before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the client. This was actually from a webinar. I ran a webinar where I asked people, like, send me your sites and we'll do some analysis.
Oh, wow.
And so somebody sent this, and it was
Charles Sturt University.
Yep. And so I looked at 4 of their sites. So I mentioned before you can choose what level of analysis to go at, right? So let's look at all these 4 sites. So I do that. And now across their 4 sites, this is the breakdown of folder 1. But we're across multiple sites. This is starting to be not very useful, right?
So wait, it's folder 1, just the first slash?
Yeah, the first slash, regardless of which site it was.
Oh, okay, so the first slash, regardless of the site. So
yeah, so
all your things are at that level of hierarchy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if we go, oh no, let me not do this way. This view is not very useful for this site. Let me go back and reset. I'm going to show you an interesting way to look at this, where we're going to look at the site. We're going to group by site by folder 1. Mm-hmm. So now it's like, okay, CSU, the main site, the handbook has 5,831, et cetera. And then with future students, help with costs has 896 pages. We can also look at this in a tree map view, which I think is really useful. So this is something that actually a professor of mine from University of Maryland developed a while ago, this concept of tree maps. This is a kind of graph that's very dense and representing hierarchical information. So here we see all the blues are the main site, the oranges are the future students, the green is the about, the red is the research. And then within each one—
color-coded by the site.
Yeah. And then we can see like the handbook, et cetera, and you can get a feel for the relative size of things of the site. So this particular type of view I used, for example, in an executive decision-making workshop of a global site. Originally they were thinking about their main site, and this was the first illustration in the discussion, not this one, but for their site. And we were able to look at it, engage with the CEO and others and say like, hey, nominally this part of your site, or this site is, has been decommissioned, but look at the footprint it still has, right? And so even at the executive level, we're having this kind of discussion, And
so this is where you can discover that you've got tons of noise search results clouding up your search experience online and offline, because Google's going to be indexing all this stuff. You're going to be indexing all this stuff. So you may not be paying attention to it because it's not on your radar from a campaign or project point of view, but it's there and it's live. And this is the stuff which you maybe should be archiving or curating out.
Yes. And one of the things we can do is we can, bring in, like Google Analytics information to use that too. Like, you could start saying things like, we want to compare the depth of a page versus its page views, or let's look here. Like this site has a ton of pages in the handbook. Maybe a handbook isn't a good example. The research, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of pages there, and maybe you decide you only want research pages that are actually getting viewed or something, right? Mm-hmm. So again, there's a discussion from a content strategy perspective what makes sense, but you could say, okay, let's bring in the Google Analytics, merge it in, and it'll do things like, if Google Analytics is misconfigured and there's like 15 different URLs that represent the same content, Content Camera figures that out and merges it down into ones.
Very cool.
So on all this analysis, we can scrape off pages stuff. We can let's say you have a site that has a lot of PDFs, then you can get the page count of PDFs, because that could be useful in content analysis. And again, this is anything you bring in it's just metadata you can do anything you want with, right? So it's all first order. It's all kind of equal standing, whatever you bring in.
And so you're extracting all this into its own database rather than
Yeah.
continuing to have to crawl the site. You can keep adding whatever data you want to this data about not just your site, but any number of sites that you're working with.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And if you're a consultant working with lots of clients, then you would break it down by clients, so you're not kind of muddying up multiple
Yes.
clients, obviously. But when you're at the particular client level, as I mentioned, and we can look at it again, we could say, it'd be interesting to do an analysis and have department sites in another group for its own analysis, right? You could do that whatever you want.
Okay. I can imagine our viewers have an endless list of questions. Do you have any other cool chart types to show us?
No, I'd like to show a little bit about rules, though, and I know we just have a few minutes, so I'm just going to just race through this. And actually, I've got to go to one where I actually put in rules. And I'm actually in the process of really improving how this works and looks. But the idea is that I mentioned before having rules rather than manually deciding what to do. So again, I'm changing around how this will work, but you'll see that there's a rule here that, like, if it's a canonical copy, so from the rod analysis, it said it's.
I think you're going to have to define canonical copy for some
people. Oh, okay. So that one site we were looking at duplicates. There were some that the site declared were duplicates. And from a SEO perspective, so again, there's a whole content strategy discussion on this, but from an SEO perspective, there's no penalty, as far as we know, for that. So there they had like a Sweden site, and they might have republished the same document on the Sweden site.
Telling the web crawler, I have duplicated this content, don't penalize me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's in the HTML. It's kind of this formal way of doing it.
Okay, so canonical site is the original copy.
Yes. So the canonical copy is the copy of the canonical. So that's kind of how. So let's say we have the original that is the canonical, and then we have a copy.
The first is just a copy of it. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm terming the copy as canonical copy.
Okay.
The one that is canonical is not included.
It's just canonical.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
okay, that's just the original.
Yeah. So so here's a case where if it's a copy, a kind of established copy, then it's going to be auto rendered in the new site. Let's just say from a content strategy, you say you're going to continue doing that. And these are canonical copies, and they're going to be responsibility. You might say, well, for the publications, if it's a redundant publication, then let's manually review it. Otherwise, let's move it as is automatically.
Wow.
And so we've established these rules, and now we look at the implication of the rules.
What is as is auto?
I'm putting together a database of dispositions of treatments. So I'm working on definitions of each of these, but this would mean that you're literally moving one-for-one content automatically, completely as is.
So this is when you say move, this is the assumed context is a site migration.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. I'm giving that as the context for this example. Yeah.
Okay, so it's move one for one, move as is, manually review. Those are three different ways that we could process this or migrate this content. Yeah.
And so here we'll see, like, okay, well, we've got 3,428 canonical copies, 1,445 unique publications, et cetera. And then, and then this many is going to be auto-rendered. This is going to be moved as is automatically. This is going to be manually reviewed. And then look, the tech team gets 4,800 and the content team gets 298. And we still have 4,000 that we haven't decided about.
Right. Okay. So it's grouping up, it's taking all this from regardless of where it is, but based on some query, it's pulling together assignments for people and then allowing us to subgroup it.
Yeah. And so now this is all just first order metadata, again, back in the charting. So we can now slice and dice this information by bucket, however we might want. Also, we can download the manifest at any time. So I see this.
Which is the inventory.
So that's the complete list of content with all the metadata, all the assignments. So then you can hand it off and say, hey, tech team, this is all the stuff you're going to do. Right, hey, content team, here's the stuff you're going to do.
Sorry. It's the manifest. So it's it's the inventory just of the assigned content for that group.
It actually is everything, even the stuff that wasn't assigned.
Okay.
But it's kind of like, it's in my view, it's kind of the end result of this analysis. It's
Hmm.
not really something you want to do often, because I'm hoping that you can do the interesting content analysis in the tool, but nonetheless, you can download it at any time and see
Right.
all the information.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at some point, somebody's going to have to take it into some other system and automate some stuff for
Yeah,
doing things, because this is
yeah,
analyzing. It's not actually going to make things happen out in the real world. So
right.
you may have to have coders take that inventory and be able to code against it.
Yes. So that's the lightning tour.
Okay, cool. I think that there's probably lots of cool other things, but this is enough to get me very interested in seeing more of what it's capable of and basically how it could help looking at dividing up the work, especially on a large site. I think I have a big range. We have my clients are mostly enterprise, but content is adding up. People are having thousands and thousands of pages much more often now on their sites, and many content strategists will take a kind of uh, every problem's a nail because I have a hammer view and go,
Yeah,
well, then you've just got too many pages. So you should have less pages, because they can't possibly, with their methodologies, audit inventory audit and analyze that many pages and kind of encourage a reduction in volume just because. Sometimes there's only so far you can reduce the volume. I do agree that less pages is usually better, but sometimes there's just that much content, and that's there for a reason. I had a client once that was releasing a product a week,
hmm.
and every product had to have its pages that were unique and talked about how that product was unique within that company's portfolio of thousands of products. So there's just no squishing it down sometimes. So you have to have something that can look at it all and do mass analyses. So this is a kind of tool that's ready for the future of the web.
Yeah, I think that the whole realm of deleting is interesting. Um, I, I've I agree with you that it's not as simple as let's just delete a lot of content, and I do think it's kind of a hammer kind of situation where, and it's also, it sounds good, right? Like people tweeting about this kind of thing, it
Oh yeah,
sounds really
like
impressive.
I
I mean,
burned through
everybody
half the
can.
content and everybody's happier now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But a lot of clients, I worked with the Library of Congress, for example, down the street here.
Yeah,
They've got a lot of content, and
yeah.
they've got a lot of content. You know
And
what I mean?
that's the end of it. There's no cutting it down to a tight 100 pages.
Yeah, exactly. So it really depends. But yeah, fundamentally, the idea here is just what you were saying, that this allows you to explore and decide and better understand what you even got in order to make smart decisions. So yeah.
Cool. Very exciting stuff. Thank you, David, for joining us and showing us Content Chimera. I am sure we'll get some questions about it, and maybe we'll have another session to talk a little bit more about it in the future. I hope that everybody watching has checked out the Omnichannel X website and to sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about more sessions like this and about our annual conferences. Or the next one at the time of this recording is June 8th to 10th in Amsterdam of 2020. So check out the Omnichannel X website, and you can also check out davidhobbsconsulting.com, and for the tool Chimera, CHIMERA davidhobbsconsulting.com for more information. That link should be in the description of this video, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, David, and we'll hope to have you back with us whenever we can.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, have a good one, everybody.
Bye.